So, what is an adjective? An adjective describes and gives us more information about the noun, which is a person, animal, place, or thing. It can give us attributes like shape, color, and size. It can also be used as a description of a pronoun, which, for example, explains how someone does something. With adjectives, someone can tell us if they think you have a great haircut or a horrible one. In short, adjectives are information gathering words such as good, bad, wooden, strange, and English. A couple of examples we have of adjectives in sentences are: the boy was kicking a red ball. Here, red is the adjective, as it gives us a description of the ball. The ball is red. I can run very fast. This sentence answers the question, how can I run? I can run fast, meaning that fast is the adjective. This can be confusing, as some might think that very is the adjective, but it is actually an adverb which will be brought up in another lesson. For now, remember that he was not running very, but he was running fast. I don't feel so good, Mr. Stark. In this sentence, good is the adjective as it explains the state of someone. How are they feeling? Not so good. All of these are words that give us further information. Now, take a look at task number 1 and read through the words. In this assignment, you are asked to connect the adjectives to the corrective translation. You will be given a couple of minutes to connect the words.
Short stories. What is a short story and what are the characteristics? A short story usually contains somewhere between 500 and 7,500 words. Short stories follow a narrative text type, text genre. In a short story, there is between 1 to 4 characters, and 4 characters max. It usually focuses on one single event and has one plot. A short story also has one setting. As you can see on the graph, it starts with an opening, then there is a plot point that comes with rising action, and then comes the climax. After the climax, the plot is resolved and ends on a resolution, which is the ending of a short story.
The construction of a short story. Now, you know what the typical attributes of a short story are, but how does one think when they are writing one themselves? Like most texts, a short story needs thorough thought, rewriting, and revising. But to facilitate the writing, we have here a model that follows the usual form of a short story. It starts off with an introduction that gives us a clue about things like who is in the story, where did it take place, when did the story take place, how did the story start, and what happened. This can give us an insight into things like a memory, a thought that kicks off the story, or the beginning of an event. This is a critical part of the story, as it is supposed to catch the reader's attention and make them want to keep on reading. Next is the body of the story, which is the bulk of the story. This is where the actual scene or scenes progress and build up towards the climax. Here the focus is on developing the story and characters as preparations for the conclusion. The ending is where you tie the story together and wrap it up. This is the point where an issue resolves and they either move on or leave questions unanswered. There is a lot of freedom when writing a short story, and that gives you full advantage to use your imagination and innovation for the next assignment.
Write your own story narrative. Your assignment for this week will be to write a short story with your own choice of topic and genre. Use the template presented in task 2 as guidance. In your story, you should incorporate at least 6 of the adjectives in task 1 and underline only the provided adjectives that you choose to use in your story. Your story should be somewhere between 700 and 1,000 words long.
For next week, you should hand in the first draft of your short stories before the deadline, which is on Thursday. Then, for the next lesson, Your texts will be handed back with the teacher's notes for you to look over. Revise your short story for the final draft. During the lessons, we will also go over questions and thoughts you might have. Now, we are going to go over our thought process and explain what theories and methods we built this lesson on. Explicit learning. Our lesson is focused on grammar and vocabulary exercises. We start off the lesson with an explicit explanation of the word class adjectives. One of the more prominent methods we use during this lesson is explicit teaching, which seeks to internalize the information with the student and teach them to apply it to a new sentence structure. This is teacher-centered, as the students plays a passive role during the teacher instructions. With this thorough introduction to the grammar form, we use a few common terms used in metacognitive language that we wanted the students to familiarize themselves with. Using these terms will help them better understand feedback that requires an accurate explanation. However, it should be noted that there should not be an overuse of these metacognitive terms, as it might further confuse the student. They only need a basic understanding because it will facilitate their future learning. We are using the learning method, which means that the students are being made aware of grammar so we can help them understand future dilemmas. We also teach the students about short stories deliberately, so they understand the concept before they deep dive into writing their own short stories. We use a model made by Thornberg, where they write about a guide on how the students learn grammar. The scale goes as notice, comprehend, intake, and lastly, output. This means that they are first exposed to the new form, which in this case was adjectives. They now notice the grammatical form and they understand that there is something new to learn. When they have understood the new form, they can put it into context as they read or hear the language. And lastly, when they have mastered a new grammatical form, they use it in their own output, such as speech and writing. We also ask the students to follow a systematic instruction, as the first task focuses on the form and the grammatical use of adjectives, while the second task then encourages the student to think freely about content, context, and how they use the language. This is typical of the systematic instruction, as it encourages students to both think about the language in a grammatical way, as well as the content of the text, as it should be comprehensive and well thought out. The cognitive method we used with individual assignments. The students were allowed to use their own cognitive ability to approach both tasks. The students were to mostly work individually to strengthen their own abilities and give them a chance to reflect themselves over their writing. We make them write as a way for them to think and learn in the process. We do this because writing is easy to determine how the student develop, and a form for them to express themselves in a creative and safe outlet. Only the teacher will read the text, which makes it easier for the students to write freely, compared to if we were to use peer review, where the students can get anxious because of the exposure. We also used a segregated skill approach. This is used because the assignments were very straightforward and we asked the students to specifically focus and practice their knowledge of adjectives in isolation. This is so they fully understood the word class and were able to apply it to their own text and speeches. The segregated tactic could be viewed as old-fashioned, as it relies on a stricter approach to grammar, but we use it as another way to strengthen their cognitive ability. Its practice implies that the learner should remain a passive listener when a lecture is given, which could be seen as another negative aspect of the approach, but it is an important skill to be able to listen to instructions.
Approaches and theories in the second task. We use a genre-based approach when explaining the second task. The second task is also focused around a narrative story, which in this case is a short story. A narrative story follows a personally narrated text type. We also focus around the explicit learning pedagogy to explain and provide examples of what characteristics there are in short stories. This is combined with a genre-based approach. the long-term goals with this lesson. This lesson we want them to have a better understanding of grammar and have added explicit information about the word-class adjectives. The student has been introduced to a form of literature, written a short story and developed their writing communication skills, and worked individually to enhance independence. The knowledge requirements for Grade E in English 5. In written communications of various genres, students can express themselves in relatively varied ways, relatively clearly and relatively coherently. In oral and written interactions in various and more formal contexts, the students can express themselves clearly and with some fluency and some adaptation to purpose, recipient, and situation. Thank you for listening.